Hi,
Hi.
I'm Godfrey Cheshire. Please welcome Ahmad Kiarostami to the stage.
Ahmad Kiarostami, please welcome Godfrey Cheshire.
It really is a pleasure to see this film again. I love this film, and I will say it's very few films you can get up after and say this film has got to be kind of unique in cinema. I don't know if there's anything close to it. It's different from, I mean, it makes you think of a lot of other things, but it's different from any feature that I've ever seen. And even though it's also very different from Abbas Kiarostami's previous films, it's sort of full of the spirit and a lot of the aesthetic concerns of them, I think. I know that the film was mostly completed, but not entirely completed, when he died in July of 2016, and you had a lot to do with completing the film. And I want to talk about that, but let's start out with his fascination with photography, because it sort of comes out of that, right? I was reading an interview with him today, actually, in a book that was published of his photographs in Iran in about 2000. You know which one I'm talking about, the big book? Okay. Anyway, in the interview, they asked him when he started getting into photography. And he said it was in the beginning of the Iranian Revolution that there was a big work slowdown at that time. I guess that's probably an understatement. And so he had a lot of time to fill, and I sort of got the feeling that he wanted to get out of Tehran, and this was a way to do it. And maybe there were things going on at home that made him want to get out of Tehran. But that's where he said it started. Now, he had started out earlier in university as an artist, studying painting and that, and he'd done graphic design and things, and he'd gotten into filmmaking. But at this point, it was around the time of the revolution that he started. You were a little kid. Do you remember anything about him beginning his fascination with photography?
I do remember, and that's one of the things about Abbas, that you always had so many different stories, that you never knew which one is right, which one's real, which one's not real. But let me, before I answer that, let me say something that I prefer to start with this, that as some of you may know, Abbas was sick for 4 months because of the surgery that he did before he passed away. And at some point he lost his voice completely and he couldn't talk. And one thing that he told Bahman, my brother, was one thing that is more difficult than the sickness is I can't talk and somebody else should talk on my behalf. And I always remember that, and I'm sitting here on his behalf talking, and I feel guilty about that. But beside that, I think here specifically tonight, we have you here. You know more about his cinema than I do. And we have Paul Cronin here, who wrote a great book about him. He sitting back there. Yeah. He wrote an amazing book about his master. I think he went to his master class for 10 years.
It's called Lessons with Kiarostami.
Lessons with Kiarostami. I highly recommend, if you're interested, I highly recommend checking that out. I think he knows about my father a lot more than I do.
And Paul also translated a lot of Abbas's poetry and has published a 700-page book of that. Yeah. And it's really great. And there's such a relationship not only with photography, but also with poetry, I think, in this film.
But with you, I want to tell one story. Many years ago, I live in San Francisco, and many years ago, there was a screening of Close-Up at MoMA in San Francisco. And Godfrey was there, and he was talking about Close-Up, and he talked about bamboozle, that how this film is about bamboozle, that everybody is
bamboozles somebody else.
Somebody else, like Sabzian is doing Ohankha family, but my father is doing all of them, and all these things. And at the talk, he said that even the court scene is part of it is fake. And after the screening, I told Godfrey, it's not true. The court scene is not fake. He said, no, it's fake. I said, no, Godfrey, it's not fake. He said, it's fake. So I had to call my father that night. I said, Godfrey says that the court scene is fake. Is it true? There was a pause and said, yes, Godfrey is right. So even you know more than I do about his cinema.
Well, you're right. He has different stories that you never know exactly which is the right one.
But as long as I remember, he did photography. But it is true. After the revolution, the cinema was basically shut down in Iran for many years. Yeah. Until like for 5-6 years.
Yes.
He didn't make any film those years, so he did different things. He did a lot of carpentry. He made different things. He made the dining table at our home, all these things. And one of the things that he started doing a lot more was photography, and he had the Yashica
Yes.
camera that he took most of his pictures with, that only one lens,
Right.
and then he changed into better gear. Yeah.
Yes, I remember I went shopping with him at B&H Camera here in New York one time, and he definitely upgraded his technology. But so he did a lot of it from then on. I think it was something. A lot of it had to do with nature and wanting to go out into nature. I mean, he didn't just do photography and take a lot of pictures of people and around the city of Tehran. It was a lot of it had to do with going out into nature.
Yeah, in all of his photos, on the last two collections that we have not shown them anywhere yet.
Okay.
Hopefully, it's going to come out. But he never had people in his pictures. It's nature, doors,
Yes.
trees.
Yes.
Those kind of things. He never had people. Yeah.
Right, and part of it was, I think there was a fascination with nature, but also it meant getting away and having a kind of meditative solitude by himself, away from all other things. I mean, I know that he said in this interview that sometimes he went with one other person, a friend or Baman or something, but he also often went alone just to be by himself.
That's true, and he usually said that going to nature is a way to wash his eyes.
Yes, yes, I think that's a great
also,
expression.
somebody said something about 24 frames that I found great, fascinating. He said, "This is the first time I see somebody visualize silence."
That's a very nice way to put it, I think. Yeah, exactly. So he did this, and you and I got to be friends first when I started going to Iran in the late '90s, and at that point you were living in Tehran and you were in the computer business. And I think when we were talking about this film, you said that maybe one of the first things that started him moving toward this film was that you scanned some of his prints for him, and then he saw that he could manipulate the images digitally.
So I would say that he loved manipulation in general, like not just his films, but he loved playing. He was very playful, and that was part of his playfulness. In his pictures that he took with film, like he would go to. There's a great documentary called 76 minutes and 15 seconds with Abbas Kiarostami by Saifullah Samadian.
Yes.
So you see a little bit in that documentary that how he wants to change the contrast of some parts. This is old days when he had film, and he would use the film for his pictures. But then the first time he had digital, he wanted to scan some of those, and then he started taking digital pictures. And he wanted to make some manipulations, and he would come to my office and sit there and say, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" And little by little, he learned about the technology he could use. So he was the opposite of, he didn't understand technology. He had a cell phone, but he didn't know how to use the address book. He had to punch in the number every time he wanted to call, but he knew exactly what to ask. So he learned little by little, and you see it in different things coming out at the same time. These two photo series that I mentioned, the one is called Monet and Me, the other one is called Regarde-moi, or Look at Me.
Right.
In those two photo series, he used computer a lot, and you see a lot of the same change in his mind that you see in this film.
Yeah. Monet and Me, he takes the images of Claude Monet's paintings and
his
does
own,
what with them in his own?
His own pictures, and he has combined Monet's painting with his own photos.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, they're very interesting. Well, to me, in encountering this film and just thinking and writing about the latter part of his career, I actually just came up today with a phrase that I think I may use in what I'm working on now, Kiarostami's millennial pivot, because it seemed to me that around the time of the millennium, he'd made all these great films, these masterpieces that had won all these prizes, but then he started being much more experimental after The Wind Will Carry Us, it seems to me, and he did ABC Africa, which was a kind of an improvised documentary that they just shot, he and Saifullah, with mini DV cameras and thinking these were notes, and then decided to make a whole feature out of the notes, and then he did 10 with these very small digital cameras and such. And in a way, to me, it was surprising that he embraced digital in the way that he did, because it seemed like he was married, like a lot of other great filmmakers, to the celluloid image, but he made a very fast
Actually, he was not. He didn't care. He saw all of these things as different ways of expressing himself.
Yes.
And the bigger the crew was, the more difficult was the the more interference he had with
Right.
expressing himself.
Right.
So he always looked at ways of reducing his
Right.
crew.
Right.
And usually his crew was very small. He had like the whole crew was like under 10 people.
Right.
So digital gave him the opportunity to reduce it.
Yeah.
And also with Taste of Cherry, he had a lot of problems
Yes.
with
Remember.
the ending, that he shot the film and they ruined the negatives in the lab, and then he shot it again and the same thing happened. It happened twice. With digital, he didn't have to deal with any of that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Actually, if you don't mind, I want to say a story.
Sure.
I apologize for the technical problem that happened, but it reminded me of something. He has a film called The Traveler, Musafir, that I don't know if you have seen it or not, but at the end of the film, this kid goes to buy tickets, and right when he gets to the will call place, the guy says that we're out of tickets, right there. And so I saw the film when I was a child, but when I was 14 or 15, I asked him, like, wasn't it a little cheesy that right when he got there, you said they were out of ticket? And I said, yeah, when I look at it, yes, but you wouldn't believe it, that this is the story of my life. It happens all the time to me. That when I get there, it happens to me. And I have a lot of technical issues. Like whenever I show my films, something goes wrong. Like most sensitive audience. And I said, no, I don't believe you. And then after a while, that thing kept repeating and repeating. And he was like, Didi goftam, didn't I tell you? And the last time actually I saw him was 2.5 years ago in Toronto, where he was there for a photo exhibition that was also showing Where's My Friend's Home, a digital remastered copy. They also showed 2 frames of 24 frames.
Mm-hmm.
And they had technical issues. They could only show one of them. The second one they had to skip. And said, again, he told me, "Yadte goftam, do you remember I told you this?" And tonight this happened. I'm sorry about that. So.
Well, his spirit is with us then.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
You know, one of the most famous instances of that was when Close Up was shown first outside of Iran in Munich, I believe, and they mixed up the reels, and he decided he liked it better, so he went back and mixed up the reels himself and recut it. So the first version of Close Up I saw was different from the next one I saw.
The same thing with the ending of Taste of Cherry.
Yes, exactly. One of the things that surprises me about this film is that, he committed himself with this to be in front of a computer for a very long time. I mean, that's really what this work was. He did it in his the office in his basement at home with this guy Ali Kamali, who was the one that knew how.
Actually, Salma was there also.
Who's
Salma
that?
was Abbas' assistant. She's sitting back there.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Salma.
But I would think that sitting in front of a computer for a very long time would be the last thing that he would want to do. What do you make of this decision to
When
do
he
this?
worked, I think he didn't care. Actually, Ali says this, that they would work for 10 hours on this.
Yeah.
And like, oh, we're tired. Let's take a break and work on Mona and me.
Yeah.
So taking a break didn't mean not working. It meant
Right.
working on something else in front of computer again.
Right. And even though he didn't understand the technology at all, he was happy to
But he knew what to ask.
Yeah, he knew
he didn't know how to do it, but he knew what to ask.
Right. Well, the things about this I want to ask is that, he is using original photographs of his, except for the very first one, right?
Not exactly.
Really?
No.
Really? Well, explain that.
So some of those photos are real. I remember that the photo that you saw in Paris with the Eiffel Tower,
Yes.
that frame, that was real. And I remember that he told me the story that this group of people, they were standing there and they were mesmerized, just looking at the Eiffel Tower as if it was an amazing thing, and they wouldn't move and they were not aware of what was going on around them. So that was a real thing. And then he animated the same thing, basically.
Right.
But many of those pictures did not exist. He just brought different elements from his different pictures, like a tree from here, a mountain from there, snow from here, and then adding a footage, stock footage that he found on internet from a wolf walking. So that was it.
But
he imagined the whole thing.
But all of them sort of start with a photograph or include some photograph? No?
So included parts of different photographs.
Yeah, yeah.
But like many of those pictures, there's no picture that looks exactly like that.
Okay.
Like the Paris picture, there's a picture that looks exactly like that.
Right.
But many of them, he created how to say, like he brought different elements from different pictures.
Right, right.
And he built the whole thing on computer.
Right. Well, you know, one thing I thought about in watching it this time is that it is, you know, when you first hear about it, it's based on his nature photography, a lot of it. And yet his nature photography includes a lot of other stuff that's not like what you see here. A lot of green fields and mountains and beautiful pastures and trees, stands of trees and such. A lot of that's not here. This is very, you know, you see a lot of seascapes here. You see a lot of snowy landscapes. But how do you suppose he went about choosing these as opposed to the other kinds of nature photography that
So
he had?
my guess is as good as yours. Maybe Salma knows more and she can tell us. But he loved snow in general.
Yeah.
And one of the very first series that he had was Snow White.
Yeah.
All in snow.
Uh-huh.
And the contrast that you see there, he loved it.
Right.
Also, all these CGI stuff that he did in the film was
Right.
much easier. Like there were problems, so he would add snow to it. It would
Yeah.
cover some of the problems.
Yeah.
You cannot do it with like a green.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of it was because of the technology. Part of it was because he loved snow. And again, that's my guess.
Well, I was
But I
trying.
know part of it, like a lot of those snow and rain and all those things,
Yeah.
was there to cover some of the things that you were not supposed to see.
Well, one thing that struck me as a possible reason was that there are in every, you know, in each of these frames, some living beings. They're mostly animals, and it seemed like maybe he chose these particular backgrounds to suit the animals that he wanted to go in there, or conversely, the backgrounds suggested certain animals that would be there. But I wanted to ask about the animals. Were those animals based on any real images? I mean, there's a thing for credit for animal wranglers or something in the end. Did he photograph animals to put them in there?
I'm glad you asked. All those names that you see at the end of the films,
Yeah.
they're just nonsense. He just added it was part of him being playful. The whole crew that worked on this film, there were like 4 people. So all those names is just Abbas being playful. And if you can read those names in Farsi, they usually have a funny rhyme or funny meaning. So there were no. Some of the frames he used green screen and he shot.
He shot
But
some
many of them,
animals.
like he emailed me several times, said if you see any stock footage of any animal, send me. And I think the way he did was he had a nice picture and then he had a nice video. So he thought how I can put these things together. Many of them.
Yeah.
I don't say all of them because some of them he specifically, when you have green screen, that he shot something specifically for that.
Right.
Especially some of the scenes that we did not use, the early ones, because he had 6 frames from paintings.
Right.
And for those paintings, he specifically went and shot something for that specific frame.
I see.
But I think after that, when he switched to pictures, he used a lot of stock footage.
Right.
And used it there.
Well, yeah.
Salma, am I right? Yes? She says yes.
Well, in some of the images of animals, they look like they could well be computer generated. There's some birds and stuff. But then there's some, like these ducks, an elaborate thing of ducks and a thing of cows going across the screen, that look like they must come from photographic images that have been shot somehow. So it's a combination of these various things.
It
right?
is a combination. And
Right.
you know, like if you have seen 5, in 5 it looks very natural, like a bunch of ducks just walking around.
Right.
But if you watch 76 minutes and 15 seconds, you see that all of it, Abbas is actually doing something with those. So it's not random. It's not organic. He's directing all those animals.
Right.
And I think with this, no, literally, with this, he directed those animals on computer because it was easier.
Yeah.
But everything, I think he thought about little things. And you know, he was very sensitive to details.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a story that after he passed away, I went back to Iran, and there's a little town called Lavasun where my brother lives. And we went there and we were having lunch at a very small restaurant. And Bahman, my brother, told me that the lighting in the restaurant, Abbas designed this. So what do you mean? I said, yeah, he designed it. And he told me the story. He said he was showing his pictures to the ambassador of Japan, but the house that they were going to was in Lavasun. And he asked me, what's the best restaurant here that if we want to go have dinner afterwards? And I said, this is the restaurant. So he goes to the restaurant a week before, and he looks at the place, and he tells the owner that I don't like your lighting. And like, so what do you want me to do with this? So you have to change it. He said, how to change it? So let's go shopping. So the next day they go shopping. He changes the lighting of the whole restaurant because he's supposed to go have dinner next week. So that's the level of details that he paid attention to.
Right.
So you can see everything here. Nothing is random. Nothing is. He brought all these things, but he thought about every little movement here and there.
Right. Right. Well, you know, one thing I'm very curious about that you and I haven't talked about before is the soundtrack and how that was created. And was it done at the same time each of the frames was done, or were all the frames done visually and then the soundtrack created after?
I'm glad that you asked that, actually, because that was an important thing. So everything that I did, it was rarely a creative decision that I had to make. Like, he had 30 frames, but we had to pick 24. Creatively, I did not change anything, almost. Some of the frames, they were like 6 minutes long, that they were supposed to be cut down to 4.5 minutes. That's what I did. One of the soundtracks I had to change later. We showed at Cannes with the original soundtrack, but we couldn't get the copyright for it, so we had to change, which is the frame that we showed twice tonight. That one was changed with Maria Callas singing, so that was the only one that I picked. Everything else was picked by Abbas. So musics, they were picked by Abbas. The basic version of sound effects were done by Abbas, like the one that you have, somebody walks in and throws the keys, and there's a, you remember that one? So the lady who did the sound, which she's amazing. She remembers, she said that Abbas was very upset that day. He said, let's do the sound. And he was very upset. And he walked in and threw the keys. So he decided about the creative part of it. But we redid the sound completely because it was just a test. And we did it in a high quality surround sound. And we changed some of the parts, and we changed some of the videos. So we had to change the sound with it. So we redid the whole sound when we worked on 24 frames.
But it was all based on what he had done originally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I did not make any creative decision about the film,
Right.
except for that one song, Maria Callas.
Well, I wanted to get into what you did, and I know that you just mentioned that when he passed, there were 30 frames, but the intention was always that this would be 24 frames.
Yes.
So, and originally there had been 40 frames, so he had already cut it down by 10 frames, right?
So it wasn't, he'd never finished those 40 frames. He tested different things. He started with paintings,
Yeah.
but it didn't go the way he wanted it to go. So he finished 6, not exactly finished, but he worked on 6.
Right.
Then he switched to his photos.
Right.
And he worked on about 40-something frames, but many of them he decided not to use himself.
Yeah.
Eventually, he had 30 frames,
Uh-huh.
that from which we chose 24 frames.
Right.
Yeah.
And how did you go about making that decision, and did you feel weird about, taking the creative reins at that point?
I want to tell you another story. We had a photo exhibition of Snow White in Korea about 4 months ago. And those pictures, they're almost the same size, but not exactly, like 1 inch bigger, 1 inch smaller. And we were sending the prints to Korea, and they were framing it there. And it was difficult to have different sizes. And I made a decision to crop those pictures to exact same size. For about a month, I had nightmares every single night that Abbas came to my dream and said, why did you crop my pictures? And I'm not kidding. And I had the same thing about this film. And even last week, when I was getting close to this screening, I had the same thing, that he was there, somehow he came back. And I was sitting there, I said, do you know that next week we have a screening? And he wouldn't say anything. I said, are you happy with the 24 frames that we picked? And he wouldn't say anything. So it was a very, very difficult, I want to tell you that, how it was. It was a very difficult process. And I tried to talk to people. One of the most difficult things was, like, I think the way I think, obviously. But I had to think that how Abbas would think. Like, there's an expression that, what would Jesus say? What would Jesus do? I had to think, like, what would Abbas do? So I had to talk to people. I had to talk to Ali. I had to talk to different people to see what was the idea, how he was seeing this. And then there were some technical issues that we had to make decisions about. Very few things I changed, really, like the frame number 3 with a cow sleeping there beside the ocean. Like there were things that we couldn't, because the cow that you see there are two pictures. The one that is breathing is just one picture, not a video. That they're expanding and shrinking in video to simulate breathing. And then we gets up and walks. It's a picture, and there are 4 legs that are just moving like this. And there was nothing we could do about it. And we worked on that frame so long, and eventually we added that thing on top of it so you don't see it. Like that was the biggest change that I made in the whole frame. But I always try to think and talk to people to see what he thought about this when he was doing this frame. Some of the stories I knew, some of them I did not know. But it was a very difficult, personally difficulty. Not technically difficult, but personally difficult.
Yeah. Are the frames in the order that he put, and you just eliminated 6?
Yes.
This is his
same
order. Yeah.
So 6 of them were paintings.
Yes.
That we decided to eliminate 5 of them. Actually, that was easy because, like, we thought about putting 3 there and 2 there. And it was kind of unusual to see 3 paintings and then switching to photos. 1 painting made sense because it was a nice introduction, and because the story started with that. But even 2 paintings didn't make sense. Right. So that was a relatively easy. We dropped 5 paintings, and then we dropped 1 frame. Mm-hmm. But the sequence is the same. Yes.
Right. Did he ever talk to you or to anyone that you know about the sequencing and what he was thinking in those terms?
No, he did not. But let me tell you something else that he talked. What he was doing, he worked on this for 3 years. 5 years in total, but 3 years seriously. And he showed it to many people, and he loved these films. He showed it to many people. Nobody looked at these. They said, it's beautiful. We don't know what to do with it. It's not cinema. It's not photography. We don't know what to do with it. Like people that he had worked with before, he said, we cannot distribute this film. This is not a film. Right. But I think this was, so there's a story about Fantasia, one of the animations that Walt Disney did, that he said that I made all the other animations for people and for children. This one is for me. And he used the elements that he loved, the classical music, painting, and animation. And he made Fantasia. And he also said that this is an ongoing project. Forever, I can add more to it and replace it with some of the old ones. Mm-hmm. And I think this was the same thing for Abbas, that it was photography, it was film, it was poetry. I think this is more poetry than anything else. Yeah. And he loved poetry. Right. And this is a combination of all of that. And I think in one of the reviews that came out last week, he's, I don't remember where it was. I've been reading a lot of reviews, but it said, if you're not familiar with Kiarostami cinema, this is not a good film to watch. But if you are familiar, this is the best ending. And I very much agree. This is an amazing ending, not just to his cinema, but to his photography, to his poetry, to his video insight, to everything that he did. Everything comes to 24 frames, I think.
I think that's right. And what did you what did he think would become of this film? It seemed to me that before Cannes last year, when it premiered, there was some thought that it would just go to museums. But then it got a very enthusiastic response at Cannes from certain critics, including trade critics like Variety and Hollywood Reporter. And so I'm very glad to see that it's playing in a theater, because I think most people will agree with me here that this deserves to be seen on a big screen and not just on a video.
I agree. And so he had no decision. He didn't know what to do, because when he passed away, this was not ready, first of all. But then most of the people that they showed it to, they said, this is amazing, but we don't know what to do with it. Yeah. But we finished this. We showed it at Cannes. I actually have Peter.
Is Peter here?
Is Peter here? Hi, Peter. So I have Peter to thank this, because after we showed this as Cannes, so the conversation that I had with Charles, who's the producer of the film also, was we're going to show this at museums. This is a museum piece. But after the screening, I had it the first time I met Peter, and I talked to Peter, and he said, this is absolutely wrong to show at the museum. This is a film that you have to watch from the beginning to end. And it's very important to watch the whole thing and get to the last frame, not just walk in, see one frame, and walk out. Yeah. And I think he was right. And he said he's interested to buy the film for Criterion, for Janus Films and for Criterion. And after that, I had a conversation. So I owe this to Peter, and thank you, Peter, for that.
So Peter Becker, everybody, round of applause. No, it really is great to see it like this. I want to open this up to the audience in just a minute, but I also want to ask you what else of your father's work might be coming out in some fashion. You mentioned a couple of photo shows and such. What else is to be seen? I know that there are no more feature films, but there's
actually, so one thing that I'm very happy about is we finally managed to buy the rights of his old films. So all of his films are coming, they're getting restored by MCADO and Criterion. So soon we're going to have all of his films, including case number one, case number two, which is available on YouTube with bad quality, and some people have seen it, but it has never had an official screening outside of Iran.
Right.
It was made in 1980 or 81. It won the best film prize at Tehran Film Festival back then, that year. And
then they banned it.
And then they banned it the next year. Yeah. So it has not been screened anywhere.
It's an amazing film about the Iranian Revolution that is sort of indescribable.
So I think there's a new film, case number one, case number two. But beside that, there are two photo series that are very different from his other photos. And I'm hoping that those photos would come out sometimes in the near future.
Right. Well, it would be very good to have a major Kiarostami photograph retrospective here in New York, and I hope we'll get to that at some point.
I hope to.
So let's open it up to the audience, and there should be a microphone that can go around. Is somebody in charge of the microphone? Okay, I see.
Before we open up, I would just want to say that something that, so we have a Kiarostami Foundation now that you saw here as well, that we're hoping to bring a good archive, and there are two board members here that I want to thank. One is Peter, thank you again for that, and one is Shirin Neshat. They're not official on the board yet because we just got our non-profit status last week, so after that we have to officially add, but thank you for that.
Okay, so we have questions up here?
Yes. I just want to tell you that I did find it calming and meditative, and I had no idea of falling asleep through the whole thing. It was fascinating, and I'm so thrilled that he did not just continue doing the same things that he'd been doing over many decades, and this is really, I love that, but I do see that something about the effect of the nature here does seem there's something in common with some of his earlier films that had the plot and the characters and people, and that is that much of the nature that is portrayed is beautiful, but it's rather inhospitable, and the livestock and the birds and everything really had to fight for that beauty and for that they had to struggle for their life, and I think that was part of what his experience was. That's my guess.
So one thing that he said about good films was a good film is a film that you see part of it on screen, but all of it it's built in your mind. So I'm glad to hear your interpretation of it. I think it's great.
I don't know what was in his mind, but that was in mine.
I think half of it was there, half of it was in your mind, as he said always.
Next question. Somebody, okay, if we can get the microphone here.
Thank you. I really loved this film. My question, frame number 24, I was surprised how that went off. Could you speak about that? I don't mean went off, but it was so different from everything that had gone before it. At least I felt.
It is different in one sense that you have, except for the Paris frame, that's the only frame that you have a person in it, I think. I don't know, I mean, it is my interpretation of it, and the emotion of that frame is very different for me. And there's so many, if you read the reviews that came out, you have so many different interpretations of it, and I think they're all right. I don't want to tell you my interpretation, to be honest with you. I think if you have your interpretation, it's as good as mine.
What film is it that's on the computer monitor?
Days of Our Lives? No, not Days of Lives, but
Best Years of Our
Best
Lives.
Days of Our Lives,
Best
yes.
Years of Our Lives, yeah.
And the music, many people were surprised by the music.
It's Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Andrew Lloyd Webber, yeah.
Right.
Which I think worked great
Yeah.
on this.
But it's so funny that Abbas Kiarostami's the last scene of his last film has this watching a computer with a Hollywood movie and a Andrew Lloyd Webber soundtrack.
Yeah,
I mean,
one of the interesting things that I heard was that he never had people kissing in his films.
Yeah.
But the very last film is of two people kissing. And then it's also going back to cinema. There are so many different interpretations, but they're all interesting. Let me tell you another story. Where's my friend's house? Where's my friend's home? The story, if you've seen it, the story is about a child who has taken another child's booklet and is looking for him to give it to him. And there were two different interpretations when the movie came out. One said, who was the Mohammad Reza who brought all these good things to Iran, and then he disappeared and we kept looking for him and we could never find him? Mohammad Reza Shah, the old king of Iran. That was one interpretation. The other interpretation was that was Muhammad the prophet, and that booklet was Quran that he left for us. And he heard all these things and he laughed and said they're all true, and none of them are true. So this case, I think, is true and it's not true. And that's the beauty of that last frame.
Well, I never heard him say anything about, oh, this Hollywood movie is a favorite movie of mine. He didn't even talk about Hollywood movies at all. So
He told me.
He told you?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it.
Oh, you're not going to? Okay. Okay. Next question. We have. There's one there and then down front afterwards.
Sorry, let me tell you one thing though. That
Okay.
This was not about his favorite film, but you might find this surprising. But he liked Quentin Tarantino.
Well, he liked him personally a lot. I remember after they.
No, even his films. He said something that he said that you cannot take violence out of Hollywood. At least he had added humor to it, and it's tolerable because of that humor. And he liked him personally as well.
Question back here.
Just briefly, I don't know if it's cheating for you to tell us what the 5 paintings that didn't make the cut were. That Bruegel in the beginning. There were others. I'm curious about what they might have been.
I don't remember the name of the picture, but there was one from Van Gogh. There was one from Picasso. Salma, can you help me? The other two? You don't remember? Sorry. I just remember two pictures, one from Van Gogh, one from Picasso.
It's funny about the Van Gogh because I mentioned in my review today that's on RogerEbert.com that this makes me think about a lot of other things, other films in the past. And one is Dreams by Kurosawa, where it was using animation in Van Gogh paintings and such. And I know that Kurosawa was a big admirer of your father.
Yes, and he was a big admirer of Kurosawa.
Yeah.
Actually, they met once and they talked. And
Right.
one of the things that that's part of the conversation that I find very interesting and relevant to this was he says this to Kurosawa that I read this somewhere that you said, means Kurosawa, said that films should be made with hearts and should be watched with hearts. But people make films with their brain and watch with their eyes. And I think it's very relevant to this because I'm pretty sure that he made this film with his heart.
Yeah.
And I think it should be watched with your heart.
Absolutely. Was there a question down? You had a question. Can we get the microphone down here?
Thanks. In many of the frames, we didn't directly see human figures, but we knew the presence of human from car windows, and background sounds.
Yeah.
Do you think that opened a new perspective, or is that a connection between man and nature?
Honestly, I think that's how he saw the world. Like that window and watching things. I'm sure that thing never happened, like those horse dancing, but him watching, stopping somewhere, lowering his window and watching at nature, that was my father all the time. There's another frame with Ave Maria, with a bird in the back. So that looks exactly like the window that we had when I was a child in our home. And there was a bird that would come, they made a nest there. And they had little eggs there, and then they had little birds there. And And I remember that when we had guests, we would lower the window because people would go there and would bother them. So we would lower the shades so people wouldn't bother them. And that would happen every year. So I remember, you don't see the nest, but the image of that window and the lowered shade and a bird behind it was something that I saw for many years at my home. And he liked that Ave Maria he played. So that scene is one of my childhood memories. So that one is my memory, but I think all of those are somehow his own memories, if it makes sense.
Another question? Here? Shireen? Can we get her the microphone, please?
I just want to reiterate what you said, Ahmad. I think it's absolutely true that this film, as a final film by Kiarostami, sort of culminates his poetry, his photography, his video, and his cinema all together. And it contains the humanity, the cynicism, the wittiness, the humor, and that I think it's absolutely necessary to be seen in a cinema from the beginning to the end. There was not a moment where I felt that it was monotonous, and I think that continuation is very important. But I just wanted to say, I think he left a great masterpiece at the end of his life, as one would expect, and it's...
Thank you. I agree with you. I think it's very important to see this on big screen. Somehow on small screen on TV, we do other things. We don't pay the attention. And I think it's the size of the screen is very important. But at the same time, when I was working on this for my nights, I saw this film like a poetry book. Like at night before going to bed, like in bed, just the same way that you open a poetry book and you read a couple of them and then you go to sleep. I would see a frame or two and then go to sleep. So I think big screen experience is very, very important. But when it comes out on DVD or streaming, I think you should experience that on your iPad as well in your bed. That's similarly amazing. You're welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Ahmad, and thanks to all of you. And definitely tell all your friends to come see it on the big screen.
Thank you, Godfrey.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.